And actually, the other thing you can notice here is that the distribution is still quite dispersed, but it's not symmetric anymore. So by 2009, the buyers, it's very unusual for buyers to bid more than the posted price for an item. So
this is why you have a decline in auction.
So there's been a fall, and here's a picture just showing the returns for sellers have fallen off from, they used to basically be able to sell at auction, get the same revenue as posted price, and now they get a 15% less. Okay, now that doesn't totally nail it down, because one thing you might think is, well, maybe it has to do with the prices they were setting. Maybe what happened in between 2003 and 2009 is they just raised their posted prices. So they're just everyone's trying to sell at too high a posted price. So actually, in some sense, the auction is still the right thing. So it could be about the seller. So really, what you'd like to know is you'd really like to know what the demand is that they're facing, that sellers are facing. Because you'd like to see the whole demand curve for posted prices and the whole demand curve for auctions. And then you could compare, well, is there a price for auctions which works better than the best price for posted prices and so forth. So you'd like to see that whole demand curve. Now, that's something we can estimate too, because I said before, how did we compare auction to posted prices? We take sellers who are selling by auction and then they sell by posted price, but the same item. So now we can look at those same sellers and we can say, when they sold by posted prices, sometimes they move that price around. We could estimate demand curves for all of them. Then we could average those demand curves and get sort of an average demand curve for posted prices. Sometimes they sold by auction. Now, it's a little funny, because what does it mean to move your auction price around? The auction is determining the price. But instead of moving your auction price around, the thing you can move around in an auction is the start price of the auction, the reserve price that you start the ascending auction at. And if you think about the way an auction works, if you set a higher starting price for the auction, you're going to be less likely to sell the good, because sometimes you set the start price too high. But if you do sell, you're going to sell it at a higher price, because now you can't get a low price anymore. You started the auction at a high price. So by raising your starting price for the auction, you're going to get low quantity but high price. When you set a low start price, you're going to get high quantity but low price. If you look at all the different start prices, you can draw a picture connecting low quantity, high price, and high quantity, low price, and you're going to trace out a demand curve. And you could pick, by setting a start price, any point along that demand curve, just like with a posted price, you could pick any point on the demand curve. Okay, so let me show you a picture of that, and then it'll be more clear. So this is for 2003. This is the average demand curve. I should have said a little more what the data was. This is a sample of about 20,000 sellers selling, each with an item, each selling that item by posted price and by auction. And when they sold by auction, varying their auction start price, and when they sold by posted price, varying their posted price. And then we're estimating a posted price demand curve for all of them and an auction demand curve for all of them. And then we're averaging across the sellers to get an average for posted price and average for auctions. And the posted price demand curve is, here's the price, here's the quantity, the probability of sale. This is just high prices and low prices tracing out a demand curve for a given seller selling a given item, and then averaging across them. For the auctions, it's a little more tricky, because this is the kind of outcome you could get if you set a high reserve price. You would sell with low probability, but get a high price if you sold. This is what happens if you set a low start price. You sell with high probability, but get a low price on average. These are all the different price quantity pairs you could get by setting different reserve prices for your auction. These are the price quantity points you could get by setting different prices for your posted price. This is in 2003, averaging across all these items. And what you can see is that, actually it doesn't matter so much what you were doing in 2003. I mean, auctions, in a sense, look pretty good. They probably are a little bit shifted to the right from posted prices, but they're kind of right on top of one another. But here's a picture in 2009. In 2009, a posted price is just a much better mechanism than an auction, because for a given price that you could get, you sell with much higher probability with a posted price. Or put another way, if you sell with a given probability, you get a price premium you get a price discount for the auction. And that's what I showed you before, was just the price discount. but it didn't have to do with the particular point that I was looking at on the demand curve. It's true for any point on the demand curve. Okay. So then we could, and in fact we could use these two pictures actually. I said before I had two hypotheses about what happened to auctions. Actually, I could use these two pictures to distinguish these hypotheses. So I had one hypothesis that said what changed on the internet was retail competition. People could search more easily. They could more easily find alternative retail goods. There maybe were more sellers on eBay. There's Amazon. There's more competition. That would lead to a fall in the demand for any given item. More competition, this is less residual demand for any given item. So that would mean that both demand curves would shift in. And in fact, that's what happened. It got much harder to sell things on eBay between 2003 and 2009, a given listing. You just used to be able to sell it with probability 0.4, and by the end of the 2000s, it was probability 0.2. And then the second effect was that people just stopped liking to bid in auctions because maybe the hassle was too much. And that would mean that auction demand would fall an extra amount. And you can see that happened also. They were right together, and then the auction demand fell extra. And so we have a paper where we tried to sort this out, and we used a little price theory model to try to quantify these different effects and how much of the change in seller incentives was about the general fall in demand from increased competition, and how much was about the sort of fall in the entertainment value of auctions relative to the hassle. And actually, it turns out that, at least the way we estimated it, it has mostly it seems that Facebook killed the auction, not Google, I guess, or not Amazon. It was sort of mostly the fall in the entertainment value of auctions. Okay, so let me just sum up. So I started by saying that one of the neat things about the last decade in economics was the access we have to different kinds of data and the opportunities that gives to try different kinds of research strategies and to learn about individual behavior and markets and so forth. And part of the fun of the next decade in economics was going to be looking at these new different types of data sets and trying to figure out different strategies to take advantage of that. And so I just tried to give you a couple of examples today based on this research with eBay, where we're trying to look at different aspects of individual behavior online and different features of internet markets and try to give you a flavor of some of the different types of problems in research strategies, some having to do with public policy, like the first example I gave you, some having to do with individual behavior and behavior economics, like the second example, and some having to do with sort of the way markets operate and market institutions evolve, like the third example, and some of the different empirical strategies that we've thought about. And I don't know that they're necessarily the best empirical strategies, but we had sort of we've sort of enjoyed thinking about them in different ways. Basically, thinking about different ways that you could come up with strategies that would take advantage of the scale and the detail of the granularity of new types of data that are out there for economists. And that's what I have to say. And I'm really happy to take questions about any of this. So thank you. Olivier.
Yes, on the last topic, for a given item, did the dispersion in posted price available increased? Because if it did, it could explain that search is just less costly if there is more dispersion somehow in the posted price that are available. So some people don't search a lot, some people search more and so on, but searching across the auctions that are run is just more costly. So just an explanation in terms of how costly it is for people to search might be, I don't know, maybe this is consistent with your two-third explanation, or one-third, I don't know which one explanation.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I mean, okay, so there's that. So first of all, there's several ways you could look at, I think I'm wired actually. So I think there's several ways so different ways you can think about price dispersion. So one way is, for example, the variance in auction prices for a given item. So how much do people kind of arbitrage across auctions and buy from the cheaper one? And that variation, in those two pictures I showed you, it's not actually noticeably different. It's about 15% of the average price 10 years ago and nowadays. So the variation in auction price hasn't changed.
That's at a given point in time.
Yeah, but even if you do it for auctions that are being run, only look at auctions that are being run simultaneously. Yeah, it's still about 15%. It's not much lower. The other way you can look at price dispersion is to look at price dispersion at a given point in time by different sellers selling the same item. And actually, that's something we've also looked at. And the thing that is very funny about it's actually very hard for example, if you just search on Amazon and you look at any given item and you just browse through the prices, there's incredible variation in the prices, way more than makes sense. People will be, any given item that might be a 20 euro item, there'll be someone selling that for 75 euros. So what are those people doing, setting those high prices? There's sort of way more dispersion than you could rationalize just with search frictions and the types of search models that we have. It's just not clear sort of what exactly the sellers are doing. So actually, I think it's a little hard even nowadays, it's hard to rationalize the amount of price dispersion that you see with a type of, our sort of standard Burdett and Judd type of, or whatever, Butters or whatever the search model you like is.
The discussion was already present before.
And it was already present before. I mean, that actually, people noticed that back in I think some of the first internet commerce papers back in the late 90s were papers about, has the internet killed price dispersion? And the answer was no. There's a huge amount of price dispersion on the internet. What a puzzle. And you could write the same paper now in 2015. There's huge price dispersion, and it's very hard to actually totally explain. Now, what people buy is much more narrowed in price. But just if you see what people are posting, it's very widely dispersed. Yeah.
Thank you. Just about, you said both start price and reservation price. And in eBay, a few years ago, you can put a reservation price in auction.
Yeah.
So did you exploit that?
The ones that I was looking at don't have an additional reserve price that kicks in above the start price, but you do also have the option to set a reserve price, a secret reserve price that would be above your start price. It's very unusual for people to use that. We did once look at whether it had any effect by looking at people who had done both it with and without, and it had almost no effect. But it's very unusual for people to use it, so you don't see it very much. Yeah.
So there are many different types of options, of course, but also it takes time to engage in an option. So presumably, if I was to engage in an option, I would rather engage in an option that has a very short time span, for instance. That's the thing, maybe a cost of doing two options. And also, I guess in 2003 there were fewer products sold, and now you have lots of characteristics, lots of product differentiation. And so maybe it's complicated enough for consumers, and maybe having a fixed price makes it slightly less complicated than an option when you have so many different products.
Right, I think that could be part of the transaction cost story, is also the proliferation of products. I mean, your point about the auction, it's a hassle, and so people want to buy at the end of the auction. That's right, and actually that has a lot. If you look at the way that search is organized. So when you're Amazon, for example, you sort everything by the price. But if you're running an auction website, you tend to sort the items by what's the next auction about to end. Because the thing people care about is the auction about to end, and not what's the current price in the auction. So the way search is organized is driven a lot by this same point about people caring about convenience and also about price as well.
So for instance, I have a research interest in crowdfunding, and over there you see that Kickstarter, for instance, has actually shortened the time for projects to be completed. So the participation rate goes up.
I think actually many platforms, many internet platforms, I mean, I use the eBay example of switching from auctions to posted prices, but actually that's happened with many internet platforms. So in the US, we have an online lending platform called Prosper. It's a pretty big online peer-to-peer lending market. They had an auction model where they had an auction to fund loans to individual people. And it was pretty successful, but at some point they got rid of auctions and they switched to a mechanism where they set the price for every loan. And I think in some sense, there are two reasons why they did that probably. One is people didn't like the hassle of bidding the auction, and the other is after a while they had enough data that they could figure out how to price loans. So they just used their risk scoring model and priced all the loans. And you see, actually, one of my students who was on the job market this year, she wrote a job market paper about an online labor market platform called TaskRabbit. And they also had a sort of bidding model for doing, I don't know, delivering your groceries or cleaning your apartment. And then it's actually right in the middle of her thesis. She's a co-author on the auctions post-production. Right in the middle of her thesis, not at her bidding, but they switched to a model where they just listed the price for every task. So they set the price, they set all the prices. So I think partly so you need to have enough information to know what the prices should be, but once you have it, having these dynamic pricing mechanisms, they become a big hassle. So I think you probably see that in a lot of platforms might go through that same type of evolution. Yeah.
And what about fees charged by eBay? Because what really matters is not the final prices, it's final prices after fees. And if I remember well, fees on sales are not the same than fees on bid auction. So do you manage to look at that?
Yes, so the fees are paid by the seller, so it wouldn't affect the stuff I showed you, which was about the buyer price. But it would affect the net revenue that the seller keeps after paying the fees. And we did look at the fees actually, and it turns out that the fees were changed at different points in time, and they were changed by different amounts, and they were changed in different categories of amounts. So actually, you can get a pretty good estimate of the effective fees, but it's not a very big effect. You see some reaction to it, but it's way too small to explain the whole platform sort of switching sales mechanisms. But they do matter. People are responsive to them. Yeah.
When you say it's not a big impact on your data set, in early 2008 you see a clear discontinuity.
Yes.
And I think it's exactly in January 2008 that there is the largest fee changes. So I think it's just discontinuity is really the change in the fees.
Yeah, the great thing about studying eBay is that there's a lot of people are experienced experts, so they know all the details of what happened. In January 2008, they changed the search algorithm, but that was a big shift because they prioritized posted prices. But that's actually not where you see that. You see it in September 2008. And what happened in September 2008 is that actually they did two things. One is they changed the fees, but they made the fees actually worse for posted prices. They made them better for auctions, because there's a fee plus a commission. But the overall pricing got worse for posted prices. But the other thing that happened, and the reason you see that discontinuity is, it used to be that if you list an auction, it ends after a day or 7 days or 10 days. If you list a posted price, it used to be that after a month they took your listing off. And in September 2008, they changed the policy, and they said that if you listed a posted price and it doesn't sell, they'll just leave it there forever until you cancel it. So they switched to good till canceled. And so part of what happened in that picture is the revenue sort of drops off more smoothly, but the listings drop off very quickly, and that's because the whole stock of things that would have rolled off the site started accumulating much faster. And so that was the event, the September 2008 event. I think that why you see that discontinuity in the active listings picture. Yeah.
So my question was on how does eBay feel about these changes in the mechanisms used to sell on this platform, and how did they react to these changes?
That's a good question. I think that the person who's the most recent CEO who's now stepping down, the things he was saying he had an explicit strategy that they were going to go sort of they weren't just going to be a consumer-to-consumer website for selling kind of idiosyncratic things, that they were going to be a very broad e-commerce platform, and they were going to be welcoming to professional retailers who had more of a posted price model. And he's sort of pursued that. And actually, they've done it very well with that strategy in the last couple of years. I mean, I guess for a while they were sort of fighting it. So it used to actually be hard to get your posted price listing to come up in this, to get any visibility for it. And now they've made it sort of more visible. But you know, the part of the thing, I'm sure one of the challenges for them as a company is that the consumer-to-consumer type of peer-to-peer market, they have an incredible lock on that market. I mean, they have great network effects in that business because they've got all the consumers buying and selling, and so that's a great business, and that's a business that still runs by auction. So, you know, they have to maintain that business while they also compete with Amazon and Walmart and so forth.
The only thing, the switch is also the result of the fact that most of the sale in eBay is done by professionals, like shops.
Yes.
And the auction by consumer to consumer is really diminishing in terms of shares. So we are also comparing a marketing attitude of posting from a corporate, even a small one, with nice photo, nice, you know, the shopping experience is different when you buy from an individual. When you go on eBay, then you enter a sort of shop from a professional selling on eBay. So it's also maybe the effect of you're just buying a better consumer experience with a posted price now than 10 years ago because of this professional.
Right. So I totally agree that if you look across what's happening, but remember the way I did all those comparisons was I always when I showed you all those pictures, those were always fix a given guy selling a given item and then do the comparison. So I wasn't comparing, you know, Best Buy selling a piece of electronics with me selling, you know, something that my kid had already used and wasn't tired of. And
so it's not only the same product, it's also the same sellers.
So it's all for a given seller selling a given product, and then we do that for lots and lots of sellers, and then we average across them. So sort of an average estimate, but it's, you know, everything is holding, you know, all the estimates are first hold fix the item, hold fix the seller, estimate the demand curve, estimate the comparison to auction post price, you know, do 20,000 or 200,000 of those estimates, average them.
And how many SKUs do you have? How many different items did you have at the end? Or you were talking about hats, but I guess you have more.
In the 2003, I had 20,000 items in the pictures I showed you, and in the 2009, I had about 100,000 items.
Different items.
Yeah, but we just picked those numbers because, you know, we first constructed sort of 10 times that or 20 times that, and then we just picked a subsample that we could put onto our laptop and run regressions with more easily. I mean, there's lots and lots of items. There's no shortage of items, basically. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't understand what you mean. Item, you mean one product or one category of product?
Oh, good. An item. Okay, so how do we define an item? So it turns out actually that they don't have a catalog because they don't have a catalog. Not like Amazon. Amazon, everything that's listed against the Amazon catalog. So instead, the way we say what is an item is we take the 10-word title, and then there's a subtitle, and we say that when we try to match things, we look for listings that have the same seller, same title, same subtitle, and we're listed within a short, well, depending on either a short window or a longer window, some window with time. So that's how, because there's no, and that's what makes it hard to actually study things like across sellers, to do cross-seller comparisons, because there's no narrow SKU definition in internet commerce. Actually, that's a problem with like many internet data sets, is that the data is not structured. If you were if an economic researcher had gotten to like write the rules for the platform, we would have written them very differently, because we would have forced people to give us some control variables. But unfortunately, the data is not structured that way, so it's sort of just a big mess. So you have to look for some structure where you can find it.
So you collect data, you data by web crawler or by eBay database?
Sorry, what's that?
You collect data from eBay directly?
Yeah. So one of the people who worked on this project with us actually now he's left eBay, but he was the director of research for eBay. He's a computer scientist, so that's how we we started working with him to yeah.
How is affected or by the crisis? Were you immune or?
They weren't
did you
that
feel
affected. Actually, they were not that. I don't think you don't see the crisis so.
Because we saw it in the rest of the world.
Yeah, even in Silicon Valley, we saw the crisis. It was not for long, but we saw it for sure. We did see it briefly.
Not in here.
So retail sales. So now I'm doing a project with a different company with Visa, and we have all the data on every Visa transaction. We're working with all the data from every Visa transaction, and there the crisis shows up in retail sales super clearly, because you can see that in September of 2008, even just on a day-by-day basis, retail sales fall off super fast, and they fall in some areas of the U.S. 20%. But online, they had. I don't even know off the top of my head what the drop-off was in the sort of transaction volume, but it was. I'm guessing that it was smaller than the average, the overall fall in retail sales in the U.S. I wouldn't want to speculate with that. At some point I probably looked at the time series, but it's not the notable. If you look at the time series for internet commerce, the crisis is not a major feature of the time series. Partly because it's growing like a rocket, sort of anyway. So.
To be honest, when you started by saying what happened in September 2008 is, for me, the first thing that comes to mind is that Lehman Brothers and bankrupt.
Oh yes, but but of course it spilled into retail. The other thing that happened was people stopped spending money. So, and one way they stopped spending money was to stop buying retail products. But it was not the. Probably the first thing that you associate sometimes not that people stopped going to Walmart. It was Lehman Brothers. Yeah.
You did this for the U.S. market.
Yes.
I would think you have the discovery effect of auctions because it's for rare things, etc. Then we set people get informed of the prices, and you can explain the shift into set price, and that's how it sounds reasonable. And internet expands because it reduces the information cost of the price discovery afterwards. I was thinking that if you go to emerging markets where inflation, or in the old times where inflation tends to be higher, or in the old times, let's assume someday we'll have inflation, maybe the path of obsolescence of the auction discovery effect will be different, because we know that there is with a bit of inflation, we have a search incentive that goes up. So it will be interesting, maybe, to cross markets to do this sort of a.
That's a very interesting idea. We have looked a little bit at other country platforms, but not at any. We looked at like the UK and Germany, which hasn't exactly been a hyperinflation in Germany for the last. No, I'm just joking. I think So we haven't looked at any platforms where there was
10% we will also do.
I think it's an interesting hypothesis. So I don't know, actually. It would be interesting.
Well, because if you look at the search models on inflation, and with a bit of inflation, they already find some effect of incentive for search, and price dispersion increases. They don't need.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea because it could be that there's more need for price discovery in Argentina than there is in the U.S. Yeah, I don't know actually whether you see more auctions there, but it's an interesting hypothesis. Someone could.
Everything being equal.
Yeah, well, there's there's an all else equal issue, but that's an interesting idea.
I have a question which is not on the research per se, but just if you could remind all of us of what's the legal framework for accessing all this data? Because you talked eBay, you mentioned Visa, how easy is it for you as a researcher to get access to the data? What's the status of the framework in the US, and what about the rest of the world if you
Yeah, that's a really good question.
I'm sure people haven't opted in on eBay the fact that you would run the regression on their purchases.
Right. So, okay. So there's not a there's a. I mean. So I guess there's different aspects. That's a big question in some sense. So there's different ways you could approach that question. So I think companies have different agreements with their customers about how they can, what is the rights they have to use the data they're collecting. So that's sort of one issue. And then for a researcher to access data, so lots of companies have internal research groups that are doing research, sometimes for internal purposes, sometimes for publication. I guess for academics to work with companies, there's not there's no, that I'm aware of, there's no standard. So the last, I've been working with companies for the last decade or so in different agreements, and each time it's been a slightly different agreement depending on exactly how the company's been willing to set it up. But normally with quite a lot of attention paid to how do we keep anything confidential. So for example, this project we worked with eBay, we worked on their computers. So we had a data sharing contract, and we did the analysis on their computers, working with their research group, and then all the academic papers had to be approved through a process where they looked at them to see whether we were disclosing anything that was confidential. And I think that's, sometimes the way it works, and sometimes companies are willing to, give data to researchers and let them take possession of it. But that wasn't the way this particular project worked. eBay, by the way, one thing is, in some ways is a little unusual because actually, almost everything I showed you today, in principle, you could scrape off the internet, because everything is basically public. All the transactions on eBay are public, and we don't have individual people's names. We have their usernames. So
they're not identified in the issue.
Exactly. So there's not really the one thing I showed you today that you couldn't just have scraped was the click behavior I used to estimate sales taxes. Sales taxes. So that's data that was their internal data, but everything else. It would be logistically difficult to do, but at least in theory, it's public and publicly available information. Yeah.
Last question.
Okay.
Is it to address the question you asked? Is it conceivable to use buyers' data from buyer's side?
Oh, sure.
And because then maybe historical data showing that they got fed up with, after trying to buy and then maybe failing, they switched to something more behavioral like this. Very simple explanation where I tried myself several times, and then I always felt the seller was putting a price above me, and I
got a little frustrated.
Yeah, and then I switched to something else.
So I have two facts about that I can give you. So one is I didn't show I didn't have this. I don't think I have a slide for this picture. But if you take, so one thing we thought was maybe you could say is, first of all, there might be a difference between kind of old time buyers, people who were on the internet in 1995, and people who came onto the internet my mom in 2012 or whenever she got to start internet shopping. Maybe it was probably earlier than that. So if you look at people when they they open an account and they start buying, the first year people start buying, they actually buy predominantly at posted prices. And then over time, they look like the market. So it takes about 1 year, and then a cohort converges and looks just like every other cohort. And they're all sort of doing the same thing. And over time, they're all trending away from auctions to posted prices. But when a new person comes in, they don't tend to bid in auctions. They tend to buy post prices. And actually, if you look at, I showed you that picture with the dispersion of auction prices, and there were cheap auctions and expensive auctions. And if you ask, who are the guys who get the good deals and who are the guys who overpay? It's the experienced buyers who are getting the really good deals, who, they get a really big discount, and the less experienced guys who who relatively speaking, they over. I mean, it's sort of what you'd expect, basically. But you could sort of see that that's what's happening. So you just need to be patient, I guess, and then you could get a really good deal. I should stop. I feel like it's probably keeping everyone's time too much.
So, thank you again very much.